right, let's get started. So, hello? There we go, that works. As some of you know, I am Mike Masnick. I would like to welcome you to the, thank you, to the Copia inaugural summit. And I have been told that it is the law. I need to tell you that the hashtag for this event is Copia 2015. Somebody else has already swiped Copia, so we're not allowed to use that. And I want to start out with some thank yous. Initially, certainly for the sponsors who have made a lot of this possible. The MacArthur Foundation for a grant was very helpful. To the venture capital sponsors that we had, Union Square Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, Foundry Group, and Spark Capital. And also the tech companies who have sponsored Automatic, Google, Yelp, and Namecheap. Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank the Copia members and guests who are here. And finally, to the team that helped put this together. Because we have been working very hard for this, and I get to stand on stage, and no one else does, but there are many of them who've been working hard on putting this together. So again, welcome to the Copia inaugural summit. All right. So earlier this week, I was dropping my 5-year-old son off at daycare, and he looked up at me and he said, "Daddy, what are you blasting off?" And I said, what do you mean? And he said, "You're blasting off. You're blasting off." And I said, what are you talking about? And finally, I realized, at home, I keep talking about this launch. I have this thing that I'm launching, the Copia Institute that I'm launching. And of course, he associates launch with blasting off. And so we may not be launching or blasting off a rocket today, but this is something special, I think. This is not just an event. This is the start of a process that is Copia. And Copia is going to be a think tank, a network of innovators with a plan to drive innovation forward, providing research, tools, and inspiration by working together with all of you. So thank you for being a part of this blast-off. And I promise you that we will, over the next 2 days, we will not be seeing very much PowerPoint, because Copia is about discussion, it's about abundance, it's about technology, it is about innovation, and nothing quite says innovation like PowerPoint. So, but forgive me for this little indulgence as I do a little bit of PowerPoint. Hopefully I will keep it entertaining. It's only 400 slides, but it should only take me 15 minutes. But let me start with a story, and this is a story about abundance, and that's because Copia is Latin for abundance. And this story of abundance is certainly talking about the abundance of information, but also much, much more. And in some ways, this is a story that I think is a uniquely California story, because there's a common question that is asked around here, and that is, what makes Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley? And you hear the usual answers that people give, the sort of superficial stuff about the good universities that we have, the easy access to money, and certainly the very nice weather. For those of you who came in from out of town, you're welcome. But is that all? Is that what makes Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley? What is different about this place? What is unique? And sometimes it's told in a story of garages. There's this garage, which is famous for where Hewlett and Packard formed HP many years ago. It's been declared the birthplace of Silicon Valley. There's this garage, which is where Apple formed, and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built the first Apple computer. There's this garage more recently, which is where Google was formed. But I actually want to talk about a different garage, one that doesn't get as much attention, and it's this one right here. It belonged to Gordon French, and it's 614 18th Avenue in Menlo Park. And on March 5th, 1975, which was exactly 40 years ago and 1 week, if we'd done this last week, it would have been even better, he had the first meeting of the Homebrew Computer Club, and this was the invitation to it. And there's a line in here that I think is wonderful. It says, you might like to come to a gathering of people with like-minded interests, exchange information, swap ideas, talk shop, help work on a project or whatever. And that is what Copia is going to be about. Exchanging information, swapping ideas, talking shop, help working on a project or whatever. The focus is on sharing, on discussing, on exchanging ideas, and these ideas can create wonderful things because the ideas in this abundance, the ability to exchange ideas that day in that garage in Menlo Park led to the birth of the personal computing industry, and from that, the value that was created around the internet and smartphones, and all of the innovation that flowed out of that exchange of ideas, that abundance of ideas. But what, again, makes this a California-specific story? And this is something that people have studied, and there have been books about it and research, and they said there was something that was different about California, and what the researchers found was that there was an awful lot of job hopping in California. People switched jobs more often than elsewhere. And in fact, if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, there are some amazing and well-known stories about famous job hopping. You have the traitorous 8, these 8 people who left Shockley Semiconductor to go to Fairchild Semiconductor, and then left Fairchild and created what they called the Fairchildren, all sorts of companies that were the initial start of Silicon Valley. More recently, you had the PayPal mafia that went from PayPal into all sorts of other wonderful companies. And in every case, you look and you talk to them, and what they said was that they wanted to do something better. They wanted to take what they had learned and go on and do more. And it's what Robert Friedel calls a culture of improvement. It's about making things better. But again, why? What about California made this happen? And an economist named Ronald Gilson did a whole research project where he went deeply to look at why was California different? Why was there so much job hopping? Was there anything in the law that made that possible? And what he found was an unusual legal regime that dates back to the early 1870s. A serendipitous result of the historical coincidence. A historical coincidence from 1872, also known as California Business and Professions Code 16600, which sounds incredibly boring, but bear with me. And it stated that every contract by which anyone is restrained from engaging in a lawful profession, trade, or business of any kind is to that extent void. And what that meant in practice was that non-compete agreements were not enforceable in California. And with that, the job hopping began. You took away the barriers to that happening, and with the job hopping, people were able to share information and create the revolution that is Silicon Valley. Additional research reinforces this, and this is research that was done by Matt Marks at Harvard, and it looked at the situation in Michigan where they went the other way, and they had non-compete agreements that weren't enforceable, just like California, and they switched them and made them enforceable. And if you look almost exactly at that time, star engineers stopped switching in automotive companies. They stopped moving jobs. And the timing coincides almost exactly with the fall of Detroit. And I want to highlight something that was said in each of these pieces of research. Again, in the Gilson research, it says, serendipitous result of historical coincidence. In the Matt Marks research, it says, an apparently inadvertent reversal of non-compete enforcement. Apparently inadvertent. And the point that I want you to get out of this is that the government choices, the choices that were made by the government matter, even when there's a serendipitous result or apparently inadvertent change. But this story, the story of garages, and this garage in Menlo Park, is not just a story about non-competes. Instead, it's a story about abundance, and the unenforceability of non-competes was merely the mechanism by which that abundance went into play. The information sharing that came out of that, the flow of information led to the innovation. And this idea that sharing information increases the pot is not something that's new. At the birth of our country, Thomas Jefferson wrote about it and saying, if nature has made any one thing less susceptible than all others of exclusive property, it is the action of the thinking power called an idea, and that idea should freely spread from one to another over the globe, for the moral and mutual instruction of man and improvement of his condition seems to have been peculiarly and benevolently designed by nature. More recently, the economist Paul Romer said something similar in talking about economic growth, that it occurs whenever people take resources and rearrange them, and he compares them to recipes and says that every generation has underestimated the potential for finding new recipes and ideas, and we consistently fail to grasp how many ideas remain to be discovered. And the difficulty is the same one we have with compounding. The possibilities do not add up, they multiply. This is the story of abundance, the sharing of ideas and what it creates, the flow of information. But it is not just about abundance of information, but in almost every kind of innovation that we talk about today. Almost every kind of innovation story that we're telling in some way comes back to the switch from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance. Almost every business model challenge that we see today seems to come back to that switch from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance. Almost every policy debate that we have about these issues comes back to that switch from scarcity to abundance. Copyright policy, patent policy, privacy, free speech, broadband access, all of them tie back to that switch from scarcity to abundance. The disruption that we are seeing today is just the beginning. We talk about the obvious cases, the stories of music and movies and news and software that have been disrupted already, but that is just the beginning. That same switch from scarcity to abundance is going to be hitting manufacturing and finance and healthcare and education and energy. And these all face challenges and opportunities. And we see them already starting today with things like 3D printing and Bitcoin and health data and telemedicine and self-driving cars, all of which have the opportunity to change the world in amazing ways, but all of which also have consequences. And these are consequences that we need to think about and discuss. And as we do, we need to recognize that the government choices matter around how these things will develop, because many of the policies, unfortunately, have been developed for a world in which scarcity dominated. Copyright and patent law today is often about limiting the flow of information, not spreading it. Broadband policy today is often about limiting competition. We see city policies that have been designed to hold back competition in taxis and deliveries and hotels and more. And so these government choices matter. Just last month, in fact, just 2 weeks ago, the California Assembly introduced a bill relating to virtual currency, which would effectively make almost every Bitcoin business in California illegal. These government policies are actually put in place with good intentions. And I know that not everyone believes that, especially some of the people in this room. But there are bad results that are coming out of good intentions because many of these policies were designed with scarcity in mind, not abundance. We see taxi regulations and hotel regulations that really were about consumer protection, and they made sense when information was a scarcity. There were bad drivers and bad hotels, and they could get away with it because they provided bad service, and the regulations were there to protect the consumers. But with information abundance, things are changing. With ratings and reviews that stick to people's reputations, you can stop bad actors by sharing information. You create incentives that are better aligned for innovation, and you allow that innovation to bloom. And I'm not saying, as some people do, that policy itself is bad, or as some others like to say, that just get out of my way, a very common refrain around here, because I don't think that is productive. Because no matter what, the government choices matter. We have these serendipitous results, and we need government to create spaces for this kind of innovation to allow it to bloom. We need governments to be embracing this kind of abundance, and at the same time, there's a role for those of us who are working in innovation areas, and that is in understanding these issues, understanding the consequences of the projects and innovations that we are working on, and then being creative in working with policymakers for creative kinds of solutions beyond just ignoring the policymakers. And we see some examples of this happening already. A wonderful example in the copyright space. People recognize that copyright was certainly not designed for the internet era, and some very smart people got together about 15 years ago and created Creative Commons as a way to do something that was a creative solution to a current problem without having to wait for policymakers. In patent law today, we have a problem that's been created where we have patent trolls all over the place. And rather than wait for the government to figure out patent reform, we have companies taking creative solutions, such as Twitter, and their Innovators Patent Agreement, companies getting together for the defensive patent license, Newegg announcing very publicly that they will never settle with patent trolls and then putting that on a t-shirt and selling it. It's in stock, you can buy it. So we get solutions by sharing information, by using that abundance, sharing the ideas, and just like that garage, we are here today at the Copia Inaugural Summit to share ideas, to discuss these opportunities and these challenges around things like 3D printing, around the blockchain, around health data, around copyright and patents and privacy and broadband and free speech, and to look for these kinds of creative solutions to these opportunities and challenges. And at the same time, I ask you to remember that this too, that we are doing, is an experiment, the Copia Inaugural Summit, and we are still learning very much. So as you are brainstorming, not just about the issues, but please think about what else we can do with Copia to help make Copia a force to take on these kinds of opportunities and challenges by working together and sharing ideas like in the Homebrew Computer Club at 614 18th Avenue. So again, we are here to exchange information, swap ideas, talk shop, help work on a project or whatever. So thank you for being a part of this blast-off.